Okay, good morning, everybody, and good morning, Daniel.
Good morning.
Morning. So this is an update for our February-March top list of the fastest e-commerce websites in Sweden, and there's pretty much a big shakeup in top 20 list, and we will take a look at the new list, but maybe more importantly, look at the new top 3, what they're doing well, but also what they as top 3 can do even better. Because even I think we'll see that sometimes the numbers can be inflated, and they can be expected to change over time. We'll also zoom in on a couple of companies we think have done well, but also in the end see that 3 of the KPIs that Page Insight is tracking are being brought into the organic search rank in a couple of months in May of this year. So that is pretty important for everybody to know. If you're working with search engine optimization, it's an important aspect of what we're doing here. Anything you want to add, Daniel?
Not really. I think it's really good to try to understand the core web vitals, especially the ones that are brought into search ranking.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me just do some housekeeping to see. Yes, we are recording. That is important. Okay, let's jump into the top list. And we have a pretty big shakeup. Last month, winner was Apotea. They had an average score of 70 last month. Now they are down a little bit, but it's not a huge change. But what we see have no less than 7 new companies at the top 7 list, where ABS Wheels, MM Sports, and Jonels are standing out. Maybe the top 2 a little bit more than the others. Some of these are very old school names, been around for a long while. Maybe they are benefiting from running pretty simple websites. Not a lot of fancy heavy content, but it's not that simple. Daniel will show you later. I think this is interesting. I like Jonels at top 3. It's not a super expected name to see at the top 3 list, and also have been they reached out to us after the last list and said, "Hey, you're missing us. I think we would do pretty well." So we added them to the list, and what you know, they do pretty well. So that's good. I also want to just remind people of the method we're using. There's been some questions on LinkedIn about that, and I would say that what we're using the Page Insight API, which is the Google hosted API. It's not a local lab test. It's the Google API test, and we crawl a start page, a representative product listing page, and a representative product detail page. We make a crawl once per day for a month, and then we take the full month average, and then we weight the scores. So we're giving 20% weight to the start page, 40% to the product listing, and 40% to the product detail. And the reason for that is that we see that on e-commerce websites that the first entry page is usually a product detail page through ads, or product listing page through search engine recommendations, search engine optimizations. So I think those are the most important pages on this list. Any favorites here, Daniel?
Favorites? No, I don't have favorites.
I think it's sorry.
But it's nice to see some well-optimized pages, and also how different approaches people take to how to optimize. I mean, some of these pages on the top 10 list are like mainly, they're fairly simple pages. That is what makes them fast. Others are not so simple, but they've taken a lot of measures to make sure that they still are fast.
And I think that is what's interesting with Janelle's, for instance. It's a pretty complex site with a lot of graphics and media assets to it, but it still have structured it in a good way.
I think it stands out as a top performing modern site.
Yeah. And so we want to give a shout out to these names, and we will look at a few of them in the top to see, okay, why is the reason they're performing so well? Is this expected to change over time? And also, what can they do better? Because I think that's the mindset you need to bring into performance. You will never be done. You will always have to improve for many reasons. The competition is coming. These scores are to some extent relative, and Google will always tweak the numbers. So even if you're doing well, if everybody else is doing well, you're going to drop eventually on the list. So it's a relative scoring. Second, it's the models, the calculation models that Google is using is changing. And third, also the test infrastructure using is changing. I think you mentioned to me, Dana, that as of March, the test methods that Google are using are starting to leverage HTTP2. That didn't happen before. So websites that in the past leveraged HTTP2 did not benefit from that. They will do so in March, and vice versa. So I think these are you can never, if this is an important area for you, you cannot. There's no guarantee that it will still stay in these places unless you make it a long-term effort. Yeah. We can jump right into for example, the ABS Wheels website. So this is a page that we are tracking in our crawler, and it's getting a 92% score in a mobile metric from Google. What are you looking at when you see this? What are they doing well? Do you see why they're doing well, and what could they do better?
Basically, the biggest reason, like since the scoring was kind of changed, that they weighted first contentful paint really high. It's kind of, I don't know if it's part luck or if it's all content strategy, but what they do at ABS Wheels, like first of all, they have a pretty simple site. They seem to have a server that responds really fast, and that's important because it's part of every score. But then they don't lazy load any of the images that are above the fold, and that will make sure, like, it will make images blocking, but it will also make sure that they are rendered as fast as they can be. And I think that's a big part of why they're top of this list right now.
I noticed that they are
also for the start page, like this is the unique one. But if you go to the start page and the category listing page on mobile, which is what we test, you'll see that this form is always the first, like above the fold. Yeah, that form is what will be measured. And it's like, if you always have the same content top of the page, you have an advantage in optimizing only that content, pretty much.
I mean, you have fewer different templates to optimize.
Yeah, this is not, I mean, it might be dynamic that they can change background images and whatnot, but basically they know that this is always going to be in the viewport of the first page view. And it's the same thing if you go to categories. They have a form on top of the page, which is mostly text. So if they render text fast, that's usually going to be the largest contentful paint.
Yeah. And if you look at the numbers for ABS Wheels, I think a couple of things that stand out to me is the first, it's really impressive numbers, but also the cumulative layout shift that will be brought into the organic search rank is a pretty bad number. It seems like half of the users are experiencing this to be a bad experience, like the page is jumping around a little bit.
And it's jumping.
Score more.
Right now it's just 5% of the total score.
Yeah,
but
that's
it could change, and that's why, like, this right now is the top ranking. But if they change that, you could have they could drop pretty fast because they're not lazy loading images, and they're not setting aspect ratios. So before this logo is loaded and this image of the wheel is loaded, like the entire area for those are compressed.
Yeah.
So that's why the layout will shift a lot when rendering.
And if you, as you mentioned, that we keep how much the cumulative layout shift is just 5%, but it could change if it's increased to 10 or 15%. It would have a much higher impact on the overall score.
Yeah.
What would you, one other thing that stand out, we mentioned the HTTP2, they are not leveraging HTTP2, meaning the browser is not able to multitask essentially when it's loading resources as efficient that it could on HTTP2, right?
Yeah, basically with HTTP2 they could download more resources in parallel. Like right now they're limited to 8 at a time, so they will have a waterfall of resource downloading. They will wait for the first of the current 8 downloading to download the next. So that like using HTTP2 is always a good idea.
And as this, even if this metric is not impacting this one that much, it still will impact the organic search rank.
Yes.
We can move on to Janelle's. I think we mentioned that this is a more complex traditional fashion page. They're loading a lot of high resolution images. There's a lot of icons and details.
Yeah.
But
I'm really pleased that there's like two, like if we look, ABS Wheels is kind of a traditional old school website. This is like Janelle's is built on top of I think it's an SPA built on Svelte, I think, and it's like top of the line modern stuff that is also performing well. And I think it's nice to see that it doesn't really matter what tech stack you use. You can still build a really fast website or a really like slow website.
And we do expect maybe this. You can see that the scoring for the product listing is actually a bit higher than ABS Wheels. I think this probably affected by the March tracking. The tracking we did was for February, but as HTTP2 is being brought in March, it could very well. I don't know where. I haven't looked at the numbers for March yet, but I would not be surprised if this would be a contender for #1 in March.
And part of what they do as well, why they have such fast LCP is also that they don't lazy load above the fold images.
Is that something you would recommend people to do? Because when you do a performance optimization, you say that you need to lazy load. But what you're saying is, but maybe not the content above the fold. So if you load these without lazy load, you would have.
I mean, you will have a faster LCP, but if you look at like how the page renders, it won't be able to render until you have the images, and that's the downside. If you are on a really slow connection, that will punish you as well. So I think everyone that does this should, instead of loading images eagerly, like which is the opposite to lazy loading, you should lazy load, but then you should also push the images that are above the fold. That would probably it's the most complex implementation, but it would also be the fastest.
Images?
Well, using HTTP headers, you can push resources like preload headers for the images that are above the fold.
Okay,
that would probably give you the fastest rendering and the fastest like LCP.
Can you tell if that's something they are?
Yeah, they're not doing that, but they probably could.
Okay.
I mean, there's still improvements to be made if you wanted to. You're never done, even if you're top 3.
And I think lastly we have the Sports, and this one hits a little bit close to home because we are working with Junker System, and we will make a coordinated effort to improve these numbers through this year. So you better look out, Sports, or at least be ready for a fight. So I think, but this is also a pretty regular e-commerce website, and I think also. What you see that these are doing is that they are being smart about how they're rendering reviews. What a lot of companies do, that you let's say you're working with Yotpo for user reviews, and you have a third-party script that manipulates the entire DOM tree for the entire page. That is going to slow you down. They have incorporated the reviews into the markup of the page and rendering with CSS. So that's going to have a substantial upside. That's one way to do it. You argue that, yeah, that's one way. You can also control the third-party scripts a little bit better, so they don't impact the score, so they're not interfering with the user experience, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, anything you can render in your own document is better than using third-party scripts. I mean, it's a good way of interacting. Like, third-party scripting on your own page is usually the cheapest way to implement a new feature, and that's why it's become popular. But it's rarely the best way. But MM Sports is also doing the same, and that's pretty interesting. The top 3 of the list, I haven't looked at more of the new entries, but top 3 of the lists all of them are not lazy loading above the fold content, and it's mostly what sets them apart.
And yeah, so you mean that what's happening, it's having a huge impact for the largest contentful paint.
Yeah, and that's 25% of the score, so it does have a pretty big impact.
Do you think it's on purpose, or do you think it's by mistake?
I think it's on purpose.
Yeah. Okay. And I think it's a good way, because this number wasn't in the score a year ago, right?
Yeah.
So meaning that if you didn't take action to support this score, you are missing out.
Pretty much.
Can jump back to the list, and just if you compare to the January numbers, you can see that we had it was a score of 70 was required to win. They dropped to 68 now. You can see Nordic Feel was in top 20 with a score of 47. Right now it's required 58 to get to the top 20 list, which is great. This is showing that, I mean, you can argue that we missed some really good companies, and yes, that's true. And we are, if we're missing out and more, just let us know. I think we're tracking 330 websites, and we'll publish the raw data of the websites we're tracking, so anybody can see who we're following. And if you see that we're missing important websites, we will put them in there. Yeah, and I want to remind people that what does a score mean? If you are achieving a score of 50, it roughly means that you're better than 75% of all the websites out there in total, not just the e-commerce website. This is a query we did from the HTTP archive public database, where they're tracking scores for random 7 million websites throughout the world. It took a subset of the 34,000 Swedish websites and created a distributed graph, where you can see that the like the score of 50 doesn't mean that you're average. It means that you're above average, and essentially a score of around 30-ish is going to put you at average. So I think this is on purpose by Google to stress you out about the bad number, to focus more on it. So I think just to put things in perspective here. And just to repeat, I think we're tracking roughly 330 websites in Sweden. We're also tracking websites now in Norway, Denmark, Finland, Spain, and Portugal. We're not ready yet to publish the results. We need to expand the list and vet the numbers a little bit better, but we will do so. It's daily tracking, average over every day of February. And it's a weighted score where we put more emphasis on product detail and product listing pages. Okay. So this is going to happen in May of this year, meaning that if you work with organic search optimization, in the past, you've had to care about your site being mobile friendly. I think this was a big buzz over the past 5 years. And I think if you're not mobile friendly, you're not showing up in the search results. So this is a good way of climbing higher. Encryption was a big post the Snowden leaks. I think that was put this at top of the agenda, and it's protecting the user. There's also another thing, maybe before we get into the core web vitals, that I think people are overlooking. And as you mentioned to me, Daniel, that it's a no intrusive pop-ups essentially, because the largest contentful paint is reflecting that value as well. And I think we can just show what it means. Do you want us to walk us through what the intrusive elements are?
Yeah, basically it's something that you put on the screen that is intrusive for a user, and this is Google's definition of that. Like they have 3 examples. The first is intrusive, the second is also intrusive, and the third is also, like, all of these are intrusive, but some are like allowed or suggested or useful. But what they don't want you to do mostly is like pop up a newsletter sign up on the first page load for a user. That's intrusive. That will punish you in SEO ranking. But not only through that value alone with the no intrusive in testicles. Largest contentful paint will also measure this. If you put a pop-up on the center of, like, on the middle of your screen while your page is rendering, that will be your largest contentful paint. So if you put that up after the rest of the page is loaded, it will impact your LCP as well.
And I think you have a few examples of things that are not intrusive.
Oh, okay, this is the non-intrusive ones. Yeah, these are like cookie messages are allowed, and also like, yeah, confirm your age stuff that is basically needed by law. You can do, and also
needed intrusive.
Yeah, basically. I mean, they are still intrusive.
Yeah,
but they are necessary for
you're
the
not
site
being punished by these intrusive components.
And the last example here is kind of a way of gaining attention without disturbing the user actions or flows. It's kind of, you're showing an offer, but you can still do do what you did.
Do you want to explain what the core Web Vitals are and how they differ from Web Vitals? I think there's a subsegment of Web Vitals. Do you want to explain these?
I mean, these are the core Web Vitals. The what's measured in the lab versus what is measured on the field data has to be different, because the lab data, you're only kind of doing a test of the web page uncached first time it loads until it's fully loaded. So there's some things you can't really measure with some metrics. So there's more metrics than these that are used. Like for first input delay, you can only measure the delay of the first input if there is a first input. And with a lab test, there's no input. So that's why they have like total blocking time and total or time to interactive instead. And they kind of put those together to try to figure out what the first input delay would be. But for the search signals, they will probably use the Crux data from Android browsers, where they can actually measure these scores and have them impact your SEO. So that's why these 3 are the important Web Vitals that they will rank you.
You are saying that the core Web Vitals are based on the field data, like actual measurements from Android users.
Yeah.
So meaning that even if you have good numbers in when you're testing on your computer, you need to verify what the numbers you see in the field. And I think that's why also we're using the APIs, because they're measuring more the field data than if you do local test. It can be inflated or deflated.
And also for these, I don't know exactly how they will collect data for the SEO ranking, but like all of these measurements are not supposed to only be done on page loads. Like it's supposed to be through the entire usage of the site. Like if your visual stability is bad when you like click a link, load something new, or when you put pop-ups on the screen, like if there's no animation, that will give you a cumulative layout shift. Like a lot of these metrics are meant to be used like for life cycle measurements, like during a visit.
If you take these numbers, we got a question about this that I want to follow up on. But if you let's go to our darling Janelle's, because I think they are doing quite a good job. They have a pretty not super strong, but not super bad number either for cumulative layout shift. They have a very good number on largest contentful paint and a very good number on the first input delay. So these are the three components we're looking at. And if you say that these are the field data and this is the lab data, these are measured on the field. And how the question we got, how is the first input delay different from time to interactive? Because this is a 16 millisecond value and this is a 2.3 second value.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say, but I don't know if I came across. Like in the lab, you can't measure first input delay because there's no input on the page.
Mm-hmm.
On the lab, you are loading the page and then you're trying to analyze it. Like Lighthouse is trying to analyze the page, and they don't click anywhere, so they don't know what the delay of any kind of input would be. So instead of using first input delay in Lighthouse, they have to use, like, it's a combination, I guess, of time to interactive and total blocking time is kind of what they replace it with. So total blocking time is like any task on your page that will take longer than 50 milliseconds to execute. The portion of the task that is over 50 milliseconds will be added to total blocking time.
50
so
or 15?
50.
Yeah.
So if you have a lot of heavy JavaScript that takes longer to perform than 50 ms, that will be added to your total blocking time. Because JavaScript is synchronous, so if you click something and you perform a task that is longer than that, it will be blocking.
Okay. So how are these numbers different then? Like if this is a 16, I mean, it's obviously different. Is this sort of how, if you're trying to interact with the screen or the browser or something, and there's a delay in that touch?
It's basically if you, the simplest measurement would be if your first input is clicking a link, how long does it take until something happens after you click, or if you're pulling up a menu.
Yeah. So you're saying that this is loading all the resources required for the page to be interactive. Like in order to do search, you need to wait for these resources. Okay. The blocking time is the browser performing CPU heavy tasks, either processing media or executing a JavaScript, and this is sort of stacking all the delays on top of each other. And this would be if the user has an intent to interact, how long does it take for the page to respond? Okay. We can jump back to this one. So and essentially we've been talking to Google about this, and they said, listen, we're never going to expose our black box. Just know that these are important. And as you said, the largest contentful paint is indirectly associated with the intrusive measurement as well, because if you have an intrusive measurement, it will deflate your LCP score as well. There's another question here. We can jump to the questions. Can you elaborate on the difference between the CLS scores in lab and the field?
Cumulative layout shift. The difference, I don't know that there is a difference there. I mean, it's the same measurement.
Here you have a 0.15.
Okay. No, but that's just, I mean, they measure the same thing, but CLS is like real user data, and the lab data is for one API test that was done right now. So that is different. Is
a great example is that this is over a 20-day period, essentially what we are doing with the crawler. So this is a large data set.
But for example, for this one, it's probably, because you can see on the test on the right here that you have an accept cookie thing. That's a layout shift. The most users will close the cookie message, and on repeat visits, it won't be shown again. So that layout shift will not be there.
But the number here is higher than in the lab.
No, it's lower. No, it's higher, actually.
Yeah, it's higher.
Okay.
No, and I think that the reason is probably that this is an average of a longer period of time for a lot of people. And if the site improved recently, it would show up in this number, but it wouldn't show up on this number until a longer period of time, right?
Yeah. I mean, I can't explain that difference without looking into it. But they should measure kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
But it could be, since lab data is supposed to be life cycle. I mean, it could be measuring across your entire usage of a page. So there's layout shifts with opening menus or pulling up search bars and stuff like that is measured in the lab data, or in the field data, but not in the lab, because lab only measures the first page and load or render.
Yeah, that's good. Let's see here. Yeah, and I think this is the gist of it. I think for me it took a while. I mean, this has personally for me been very insightful, the process over the past year we've had in our company to understand the root causes and sort of what is fundamentally affecting these numbers. And I think my takeaway is, hey, you need to understand the lab versus field. You need to understand the measurement of the numbers. You should expect the numbers to change. You should expect the test infrastructure to change, and you should expect your relative to your peers that this will change. But what I yeah, I think understanding the characteristics of what we're doing also has taught me that this is not really a war between different platforms. You can essentially achieve really good numbers on almost any technical platform. So it's a little bit more about how you structure and deliver the page for the user and optimized user experience. So if you're thinking you should run away and buy a new platform, I don't think that's going to get you better numbers. I keep in the business, a lot of people like to praise Lyko, and Lyko are currently on top 100. And I think the reason why they are being praised is if you navigate to the site, it's responding pretty fast. It feels like it's super fast, but if you on desktop, because it's very resource heavy, it's also jumping around a little bit. So the scores for Lyko aren't that good actually, meaning that there's a lot of things they can do better, and it's performing pretty weak on mobile. So I think this is a very JavaScript heavy single page application that is scoring bad on mobiles. So on the first page load, this is not a very, it is sort of, I think what you told me, Dylan, like this path of going this way means that you are having a pretty, even on desktop, it's a pretty heavy load. I mean, we're into many seconds now of loading. So the first page load is extremely slow. Then subsequent loads are faster. But but even in these numbers, you can see how the page is building up. So I think there's no software you can buy that will fix everything for you. And I think that's also why we're a little bit impressed by these guys. They seem to do a pretty good job of being smart in constructing the page in general, because it doesn't feel like they've done any major sacrifices in the brand experience or user experience.
Yeah, it's basically also Lighthouse will not do repeat visits, so Lyko is probably much better for any visitor on the subsequent page load, even.
But even on the field mobile data, wouldn't it show up in the field data?
Yeah, it would. But I mean, it's probably the test you're showing is 23, and the field data or the data we have in our list is higher than that. I just wanted to point that out, that it's not as bad as this. It's better.
I mean, it's 32 instead of no, it's 23. That's for the product detail page, and we actually have that in our score. Yeah, so in this case, you can see that the product listing is fast. If they would have improved the product page as much as they did the product listing, they would climb significantly on the page. I also want to make a shout out for, just for transparency, we have disqualified a website that was tracked not as a Danish, Swedish one. What I want to show here is Boost. They are on place 55, which is not super high. but I think when you looked where they were last month, they were on 15 to 49. However, the score has increased from 32 to 42, which is impressive. And this is a direct consequence of them attending last time, reviewing the numbers, and talking to the team and tweaking the website experience. So I think they should be very proud of this score. The scoring was also done throughout the month, so it can be even better in March, I think. So that is great to see that websites are making an effort to do better. And this is the raw data we are using. So this is the total list of all the websites. They asked us to check whether there was a difference between the Boost or the Boost mobile site, because they're serving a separate site. So we tracked both of them for making sure, but we confirmed that it's the same. It's generating the same results, so it's just for verification. But this is the full list, and we will publish this one, so you can review the material we're testing to verify that we're not making any mistakes or not missing any important websites out there. Anything else you want to point out, Daniel? No. Yeah, we have a favorite Twitter account that we're following. Who's this guy?
Well, it says right there, engineering manager working on Google Chrome. I don't know. It's one of the best Twitter accounts for performance related content. Usually has a lot of good takes on how to build a well-performing web. And it's also, since he's working at Google on Lighthouse, he has a lot of good pointers and a lot of tips on how to measure, what new like CSS properties you use, how to lazy load, how not to do. Yeah.
Can you explain this a little bit? It seems to be a big thing, where CSS content visibility auto. Do you know what this is?
Yes.
What is it? It seems like a pretty big deal. If you achieve the 1 second faster loading.
Yeah, basically it's lazy loading for the document, like the DOM document. So what you can do, you can set content visibility hidden or auto, or auto means we don't add, or we don't render children of this element in the DOM until it's in the viewport. And that's pretty wild in terms of performance. Like this is going to be super useful, especially with this kind of results. It's a really great way of keeping DOM size down and like rendering operations outside of the viewport could be skipped a lot of the time.
Cool.
But it's only in Chrome right now, and it's in like version 85 or something. So it has some way to go. There's and it's depending on another proposed standard that is like, I don't remember the name of it, contain maybe or something like that.
Yeah.
Where you can say skip rendering or skip applying styles or skip something else, layout maybe.
Yeah.
Cool. But it's like, look into this if you're chasing performance scores.
When do you think this will be available in browsers? Long time.
It's already available in recent versions of Chrome. So if you're deep, like if you've done a lot of other optimizations and you're running out, look into this.
Okay, cool.
I mean, you can still start using it. It just won't really be applicable to a lot of users. But then again, Chrome is the biggest browser right now, so it's probably worth doing
it. Yeah, and that's, I think, it for today. Are there any more questions? We're happy to take them. We got a few questions last time that we are looking into. One was, how does performance affect search ranking? And I think that's what we tried to highlight today. That as of May, this will be moving into the organic search rank. So there's no escaping these numbers. And if you didn't do the homework on largest contentful paint, prepare to do that, because even on mobile, the number of pages you're going through for clicking is decreasing. So it's a war, and it's the top 10 list. It's not a top 10 list on mobile. It's fewer options. It's also going to affect your ability to buy ads, because these scores are going to the ranking of paying for ads as well. So it's going to have a more cost-efficient acquisition budget if you do this well. We have one more question. How would you recommend measuring performance as a KPI? How would the best way to do this? Using 6 metrics and tracking those scores once a month or so? Or just the performance score as a whole? How would you respond to that?
If you're using it as a KPI, I would probably go with measuring core web vitals and trying to do it like field data. Would probably give you the most accurate data to kind of know where to go from there.
There is an effort from Google to bring in these. They have a public script for tracking these events in analytics. So I think we activated it yesterday for our own website, just as to see how it works. And there is a way. Let me see. Yeah, so here is a way to track CLS, LCP, and FID through Tag Manager and Google Analytics using a script that Google is recommending. I think it's their script. So then you are able to track these numbers over time. So that's one way to do it. So if you want your e-commerce team or search and in people to be aware of it, you can push these custom events into Google Analytics and track them that way. That would be one way to do it, I guess. You can also use the tracking tools we mentioned before, Speed Curve, the Bugbear, and these kind of tools. Maybe that's not easy accessible to the e-commerce manager or the search engine people. So maybe they could work in combination.
I think this is probably the best way of doing it.
Yeah.
If you're using it as KPIs, like add it to your analytics.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is the number of events. It's not the value, sorry. But this is, I know that Google is recommending this. That's something you should do.
Yeah, and the old performance metrics in analytics is still like page on load or something, which is not really very good anymore. Doesn't really say a lot.
Sorry, it's, yeah, there you have the event, the average value here. It's 2.1 seconds is the largest contentful paint on this one. So it's this one you want to check. Yeah, so you can see this is the number. So over time, this would be a valuable KPI to track, and it would be easily accessible to anyone in Google Analytics. So I guess that's good. He says, thanks, you're welcome. Anything else to add, Daniel, today?
No, not really.
Make sure you.
But yeah, well, I maybe just I'm happy to see a lot of different kind of websites built on different tech stacks and different techniques on the Toplist performing well.
Yeah, it seems like there's no clear platform winner in here. I think it's all over the place, which just underscores it's not about exactly what platform to choose. It's how you decide to build and construct your website.
Yeah, and also that it's both about optimizing your content, but also having a content strategy for speed could also be hugely impactful.
Yeah. Okay, that wraps it up for today. And thanks everybody for showing up today. and we'll see you next month for the March numbers.
Thank you.
Thank you.